Hi everyone and welcome to the Learning Today. It is part 3 I think, or part 4, I'm not sure, of my How to Pick Curriculum series, how I pick curriculum. And today we're talking about some of the things I like and don't like in curriculum in general, and then some of the things that I'll be looking at this year. So for the new 2021-22 school year. So for this year I've really well, let's just start from the beginning. So my philosophy for homeschool education in general is a mixture of Charlotte Mason and classical. I love books. I love living books, everything books, definitely. But I also do like, obviously, academic challenge and everything else. And I think a combination of the two is always what I've preferred. What I think I've noticed, particularly this year, is I wouldn't say my philosophy is changing, but I'm leaning more towards one than the other, and I'm definitely leaning more towards the Charlotte Mason method as opposed to classical. I still do obviously want to challenge academically my daughter. I want her to progress as high as she wants to, go to university, be a professor, whatever she wants to do, or whether that's own her own business, whatever she wants to do, I want to support her to get there, and I will. But I have noticed particularly and this year, and I think it's through 3 different reasons why I lean more towards the Charlotte Mason method, and how I want to encourage that and that to grow in our homeschool over the coming years. So the first reason is a curriculum that I used. So we used 2 curriculums in particular, I think, this year that have really, really focused my mind on philosophy of education, and that is Spelling You See and the chemistry series from Pandia Press. So if you watched my science and my language arts videos, reviews of the year, you'll know that I've mentioned those particular 2 products before. So Spelling You See particularly focused my attention because I wouldn't say always been, but I've always felt in the past the copywork, with Charlotte Mason and the copywork method, I was a bit, on the fence about it because of experiences. So I'd note when we did, for example, writing with ease in grade 1, I noticed that my daughter would be chatting away while she was doing the copywork element of it, and it didn't, she'd be telling me stories and everything else, and it didn't seem at all like it was actually helping in any way. It just seemed as though it was passing the time. She was doing her copywork until she moved on to the next thing. However, and I do think developmentally that it changes. Through doing Spelling You See, I really noted how doing the copywork for the spelling actually really, really did help her spelling this year, and how she was much more focused on it. And I do think a lot of that is developmental. She was more ready for it than when we did writing with ease in grade 1. And I do think Charlotte Mason was very wise in her methods of, you don't do all these things at once, you space it out and wait for them to be developmentally ready and everything else. So one, I do actually see the value of doing copywork now much more than I ever did before. I think the other reason is I used to, when in school, when I wanted to learn something, I would write it down and write it down and write it down, and that's how I would remember it. But then once I'd done the test, I completely forget it. So to me, it didn't seem as at the time, and especially because of how my daughter was when she was doing it in grade 1, it didn't seem to me as though it made sense. It just seemed like busy work and everything else, and does it really work and everything else? But yes, it really does. And I think consistency is key, so doing it every day or as much as your child wants to do it, and also being developmentally ready for that does make a huge difference. And then obviously also what they're writing, so whether it's something that they're really interested in or something that you can tie into something they're learning, or just generally really good literature that you want them to be exposed to. So I do think the quality of the copywork really does matter too. You can't just say, write this sentence. It has to be something meaningful either to them or to something that you want to enrich them with, if you know what I mean. So that's one thing. And then also doing the Pandia Press chemistry made me realise even more so that I love books in teaching. Because although there was a reading list and everything else, this is the first year we've not done elemental science, and elemental science is enriched with tons of books. She has tons of book recommendations. and then she encourages you to obviously seek out your own, which is what I've always done. With Pandia Press, yes, I bought a select few items for our curriculum, but I didn't feel like it was the same. I didn't feel like we got the same greatness out of it. And what was hugely missing was me going in and getting a book off the shelf and us reading it through together. Because what you tend to do is you'd read the lab, you do the experiment, you'd read the hypothesis, obviously beforehand, make your hypothesis, do your evaluation and everything else. But that was it. And yes, I could have, brought tons more books into it, but it would have extended the time of science dramatically. And with everything else, your kids only hold attention for so long, obviously, don't they? And if you're trying to pile on all these extra things, which to add richness to it, then you should potentially question, is the curriculum the right one for you? And I determined, obviously, that I didn't prefer that curriculum, that there was nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't for us. So I think that really highlighted to me how much I really appreciate the value of living books. And there's actually a fourth thing as well. So the first one, developmental. The second thing, finding a curriculum that made me open my eyes to how valuable certain aspects of Charlotte Mason's philosophy really are. And number 3, finding a curriculum that felt dry. So those are, and didn't feel like I was bringing something to life as much as I wanted to. There's actually 2 more things. So the fourth thing is child-led learning. So I've always tried to be as child-led as much as possible. But I've noticed as she's got older, I really see how drawing the connection to something that's meaningful to her helps her to remember stuff. So, for example, when I mentioned in a previous video how much my daughter likes dinosaurs and how much she learnt about dinosaurs, and she'd be like a dinosaur encyclopedia, and that wasn't a course of study that we'd done. There was no curriculum that I'd used or anything else. That was purely reading books, me to her, her to me, reading them by herself, watching things, and picking it up that way. And to me, that also really showed how interest-led, child-led learning, more than a curriculum and a set of worksheets, actually you retain the information. So again, when I go back to me in high school, when I just used to revise for a test, doing my GCSEs, I wrote a model essay, perfected the essay so much, and then learnt it, memorized it word for word, so that when it came to my GCSE exams, I memorised 2 essays in the hopes that one of them would be on the exam paper. And I was fortunate in that a combination of the question was on there, and I could just recite my 2 essays that I'd learnt by rote into my exam paper. But if you ask me now what I wrote about in my history exam, I really couldn't tell you. Not in any kind of great meaningful detail. And that is what I mean about how my philosophy has changed in terms of realising, not that I didn't know it already, but seeing it for yourself makes a big difference, rather than someone just telling it you. That when your child is exposed to living books, they're exposed to making meaningful connections to what they're learning, they will remember it, as opposed to you taking out this grammar sheet, this whatever it is, and trying to drill in facts and all kinds of stuff to them. They'll forget. And that's exactly what I've really noticed and learnt from my own experience, but also seeing it through the eyes of your child too, that there is much more than curriculum. And I love curriculum, don't get me wrong, but I think there is a way to use it and as a tool, as a guide, but then you should have the free rein to enrich it to its full extent with as many living books as you can. And I think the problem that we have is with curriculum, it can be quite time consuming, and there isn't enough time in the day to do all the extra things that you want to do and everything else. And the 5th thing that I really noticed was Fun Friday. So we did Fun Friday this year. Curriculum Monday to Thursday, Fun Friday. Well, on Fun Friday, it was everything that I planned for her, child-led, and also interest-led from me wanting to, instill knowledge in her. It was all through books the majority of the time. We didn't do any curriculum, what I would call curriculum as in textbook or worksheet or anything like that. It was all living books, making notes out of living books of copywork, things we'd found interesting, doing investigations and activities from things we found, me piecing together unit studies for her that were interest led, and also things that I wanted her to learn. And we loved it. She's loved it. I've loved it. So Friday has been, I guess, the freedom day, the freedom to feel that it's okay to teach what your child loves, what you think they should learn, without being suffocated by, oh, I've got to do page of this worksheet, and if I don't do this, then we will be fall behind, blah blah blah. And I'm not saying that that's how it is for me personally, but I'm saying that's how it can be for a lot of us when we're trying to follow we need to do lesson 22 today out of our textbook, otherwise we're going to fall behind scenario. So I do feel like there's a lot of pressure to do the curriculum, and not to stray off the curriculum path, because one, there's not enough time to do that at all. If you're following the strict schedule of a lot of curriculums, there isn't much time to do extra things. And two, because of society's pressure on, well, they're in school from 9 till 3, they have to do all these textbooks, they have to do all this curriculum, otherwise they're not going to learn. But from my own experience of being in said high school, where I was doing my textbooks and everything else, once the tests were over, I generally forgot what it was. And if you would, like I say, certain things stuck, your maths and everything else, but if you were to ask me about anything that I studied in terms of pieces of work that I was given or anything else, I couldn't tell you hardly any of it. I've learned through me wanting to learn about things, me reading books, watching programs, as opposed to any teacher in a classroom giving me an assignment to do. So I'm not saying that that's not important and everything else. There's a place, but there is a place for it all, and I think you can marry it together. And I do think the Charlotte Mason method is the one that does that so well. It marries in all the grammar and everything else in a meaningful way that actually makes connections that your kid's going to remember. It marries in all the interest-led learning and the enriching elements of living books. So that's definitely why I am leaning much more towards Charlotte Mason than I ever have. I feel like in our whole... Actually, I take that back. Pre-K4, if you were to watch my pre-K4 video, you would have seen how many books we brought into our homeschool. And I do, every year I have brought in lots more books and everything else, but I do feel like slowly as time's gone on, I've fallen victim to the, oh, I need to buy this curriculum because otherwise my child won't succeed. I need to buy this curriculum, blah, blah, blah. And then also the Department of Education, the local authority education department. If I say I'm doing unit studies, are they going to think that I'm not doing a good, rigorous academic education? Not providing an academic rich education? But that is actually contrary to what is the truth, because from unit studies we've learned so much. But I've always in the past thought, well, if I say I'm doing a unit study approach, are they going to think that I'm unschooling? Are they going to think that I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that? And it persuades you to follow this mindset of, well, if you have to learn for the test, and unless you can pass the test and then forget everything, then you've not actually received an education. So I do really feel like there's a balance. I mean, I'm not saying that, unschooling would ever be something we would do, because it's just not. I do have my academic pathway that I want her to pursue should she desire to, and I want to make sure that she has all the option to do so should she desire to. But I do feel like it can be presented in a much better way than just, we must have all these pieces of curriculum, otherwise we're not going to learn. You can do both, but you have to pick the right things to do both. If you're just picking something like the Panzeo Press chemistry, then you are going to be tied in more so than if you were to pick something else, if you know what I mean, if you understand what I'm saying. Because of the nature of the curriculum, you do your lab, you do this, blah blah blah. It doesn't leave a lot of time for everything else. So I do think you can do both, but you do just have to be mindful of what you pick, basically. So yeah, that's the nutshell of my, I guess, learning curve this year. But I do think also, going back to the Charlotte Mason method, with the copywork and everything else and the recitation. My daughter has always been amazing at narration naturally. It's just she loves storytelling. It's just something that's always come natural to her. But if I would have given her copywork to do in the past, as I said, her mind would drift. She'd be talking about stories in her head. Not really paying attention to the copywork because it was busy work. But when your child is more developmentally ready, as in the Charlotte Mason method, you don't start doing things like that straight away. It does start to work. And like I said with Spelling You See, and I'm not saying Spelling You See is specifically Charlotte Mason. I'm just saying the act of copying something every day, because I don't think it is remotely technically in the Charlotte Mason area, but it's copying something every day does actually work with consistency, but most importantly, when your child is developmentally ready. It's not busy work, particularly if it's something that's meaningful to them, that they've learned about, that they've narrated to you, that you wrote, that they've copied, that they have wanted to learn, that's enriching, is really good literature. So it's not busy work. And I do feel like that has really changed. My opinion on that has really changed, but I do think that is largely developmentally based. And also from observations and just generally feeling where my heart is at in terms of homeschool. And I want her to have an academically challenging education, and she will, but I also want it to be enriching, and I don't want it to be drumming facts into her that she'll forget, like I did once I passed the test. I want it to make meaningful connections, and when she learns through child-led learning, when she learns through unit studies, when she learns through me reading to her and her telling me back what she's learned, when she learns through experience, when she learns through life, those are the things she remembers, not whether I gave her worksheet 10 from lesson 32 of a curriculum. So those are just some of the things that I wanted to share with you, because I do think at this time of year we are all under pressure to pick the curriculum, and I love curriculum shopping, but I do think you can strike a balance between being academic but also enriching and making meaningful connections, but you just have to be wise in your choices. And don't fall into the trap of, well, if I don't pick this curriculum, it's not going to be good enough. And if I decide to do this method, that's not going to be enough. It's a word I hear so much. Is it enough? Am I doing enough? From things that I've asked myself in the past to now, things that I've seen and heard from YouTube and, other mums, homeschool mums, from thinking, is the education department going to think it's enough? That's when I said about me asking myself. But I've come to the philosophy of, it's more important that your child actually remembers the information, as opposed to anyone else thinking that your process, your philosophy, your style is enough. If your child is remembering what you're doing and making meaningful connections, then you are doing enough. If at the end of a textbook you get to lesson 135 and you ask your child what they've remembered or what they've made meaningful connections with, and they look at you blank in the face and can't tell you anything, then is that enough? There you go. I don't know. It doesn't sound like to me it would, but who knows. And also, as I said, unit studies I think are so amazing. I love unit studies so much, and I definitely will be 100% incorporating tons more unit studies. I remember having a conversation with my friend recently, well, not recently, a few months ago, and I said to her, I don't know how it came up, but we were talking about unit studies, and I was saying how much I love unit studies, but how I've always felt like if I did a unit study approach in my homeschool, that the education department or someone else would say, oh, that's not enough. But it is. I've seen it. It's more than enough, and it actually makes meaningful connections than any textbook does, in my opinion, in all the years we've homeschooled, when we've done unit studies, I've always seen, as opposed to a curriculum, I've always seen the vast difference between knowledge attained and knowledge forgotten, knowledge enjoyed and knowledge tolerated, knowledge cherished and knowledge thrown away because it was not meaningful, it was meaningless. So yes, if you're picking your curriculum, the biggest tip I can give you this year is to not worry about everybody else. Think about what is right for your child. Know what is enough for you. So have your boundaries, your guidelines in your own head straight of what you feel like is enough, because everyone will have a different opinion, and you need to be strong in your conviction of, well, it is enough for me and my family, because at the end of the day, it's your kid you're teaching, not someone else's. They're not teaching your kid, you are, and you need to know that what you're doing is going to set them up for life. And I feel like making the right decision in terms of the education philosophy and everything else, and making the right choice of curriculum is not something that you'll always get right, and that's okay. And it's also not something that you'll always find easy, and again, it can be a journey, and that's okay, because what things in life aren't. And it's also okay to stand back and say, do you know what, I found what works for me, and whether you like it or not, it's okay. And that's definitely the philosophy I'm having this year, when it comes to worrying about the education department thinks is good enough, when it comes to worrying about what anyone else thinks is good enough. I know what my daughter learns best from, because I'm the one who teaches her, and whether or not someone else thinks that's too much, it's not enough, it doesn't matter, because it's what actually works that matters. And I think too many times we fall into that trap of worrying too much about what everyone else thinks, of trying to compare ourselves to other people. The social media trend is something that's hit every aspect of life, where comparison is the thief of joy. So yes, just know what works for your kid. Sit down with them, talk through with them what they want to learn. You'd be amazed the difference it makes. And I'm not saying that we've had any problems this year, not at all. I feel like everything we've done, she's retained, she's enjoyed, some things more than others, but that's natural. I mean, not everybody wants to sit down and do a page of maths, do they? Not everyone wants to sit down and do spelling words or whatever. But when you balance everything out on the whole, I feel like what we picked did work, but there were certain things, as I said, were dry than I'd like, and things that we've really truly loved. Unit studies for us has been a huge thing this year that I've really loved. And it's funny because none of the unit studies that we have done at the time, before, when I was planning on doing them, would I have thought would be the things that would have been our favourites, because it was always, to me, unit study is something we enjoy, but it's throwaway, it's not something that's academically challenging enough, it's an enrichment. It's the other way around. The unit study is the academically challenging stuff, it is the enrichment, it's all the other stuff half the time that is the fill-in stuff, the curriculum. It just is. And I've really noticed that this year more than ever. But as I said, you have to strike a balance. There's got to be that page of maths, hasn't there? I mean, obviously you can learn maths through living things too, but there are ultimately concepts you do have to learn. So there is a balance. But this year I'm definitely leaning more towards the unit studies as much as possible. And you'll see that in my curriculum video. So take care, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.